In the 2008 Pixar movie WALL-E, life is all but extinct on Earth as rampant consumerism has led to towering mountains of garbage as far as the eye can see. Tiny robots are left to tend to the trash, while an obese humankind spends their time video conferencing and frolicking about space. Wow, good thing this dystopian future looks nothing like our world, huh? This is Gamey Builds, and today we'll be crafting WALL-E, the trash robot, with, appropriately, recycled trash. We don't call this a junk build for nothing, and this particular junk came from the back of a desk calendar. This isn't the super dense, good quality chipboard, mind you, because as we learned from my last build, that chipboard results in nothing but carpal tunnel syndrome and bitter resentment. I'm starting with 6 squares of this stuff, 1.5 inches per side, for the basic cube that comprises WALL-E's core. WALL-E's side panels have these interesting L-shaped holes that allow his arms to slide into various positions, negating the need for elbows. Once the sides were glued down, I used some thinner chipboard for the inside panels so that the L-shaped holes didn't allow us to gaze into the emptiness of this robot's soul. It occurred to me at this point that I didn't know what WALL-E's backside looked like, but after a quick Google search, I realized it certainly wasn't just the flat panel I'd designed, but rather this curved dump truck-like hatch. Oops. So I quickly cut out those curved pieces and glued them in and added a lid and some other details. For these pistons, I cut 2 tiny lengths of paper clips, then wrapped them in cute little rectangles of electrical tape. To top off the pistons, I made half circles with my leather hole punch, and to decide where to place them, I accidentally dropped them in superglue, and that's where I placed them. After adding the remaining sides of WALL-E's cube body, I detailed the front with this panel, made a grating that I'm very unhappy with out of electrical tape, and then got to working on my regret, apparently, because I totally should have had the forethought to cut a hole for WALL-E's neck bits before gluing that top part on. But since I didn't, I had to saw through it awkwardly like a moron. Here's another angle of that maneuver. And of course, then I was faced with the dilemma of filling that ragged hole up. Forethought, ladies and gentlemen, it's a thing I don't have. And so, to distract the eye a bit from this sea of superglue and ineptitude, I added some additional details like this edge and some greeblies. If you're unaware of what greeblies are, they are these tiny little details that are pretty, but otherwise pointless. Lastly, I added these half-circle cardstock bits glued together, which will serve as the swivel upon which WALL-E's head will sit. Now get out of here, you terrible torso. It's time to get cracking on the lurid limbs. For which, I stumbled quite conveniently across these mechanical pencil parts, which I cut, sanded, and admired. And holy fortuitousness, Batman, would you look at that? These eraser bits work just perfectly for these shoulder joints. Now, usually I only build things that I want as decorative items for myself, but this particular build was a personal request from some friends of mine, so if you're watching this right now, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy your little robot. For WALL-E's hydraulic forearms, I'm using Q-tips wrapped in a bit of electrical tape for a snug fit. Eventually I may upgrade to styrene rods for this kind of thing, which come in every imaginable diameter. It would save me a lot of tedium here, but if I'm being honest, I enjoy the challenge of doing these builds with whatever I can find around me. For the same reason, I'll probably never go the 3D printing route. Not that I have anything against modelers who have printers, but for me, it just kind of takes some of the charm out of building. But I'd like to hear all your thoughts on this, so let me know in the comments. What do you think about 3D printing? Yay or nay? By the way, the last few shots have been of me carving WALL-E's hands, or grabber claws or whatever, from erasers. And these last little bits are his fingers, cut from chipboard. I then glued all the hand bits together and marked one more thing off my build list. For the treads, I cut 2 6-inch lengths of chipboard, then added parallel cuts spaced 1/16 of an inch apart to turn these 2D boards into the world's first affordable Apple Watch bands. I then glued the ends together, and Houston, we have traction. For the wheels within the treads, using Legos might be cheating, but I don't really care because circular things are near impossible to craft by hand. Those are Q-tip bits in the Legos, by the way, and this one was a Lego Technic wheel. Some non-Legos snuck in here too, like this plastic paint container which provided the exact diameter I needed for the large wheel. It should be noted that while these circular solutions made the cut, there were failed candidates like these clay attempts. They never even made it to the baking stage, however, as I knew the end result would be something akin to this. With all the wheel bits done, it was time to glue them into the treads. This all went surprisingly smoothly, but I honestly can't tell if I'm actually getting better at this, or if I just chose an easy build this time. Stay tuned for the answer to that one. With the wheel bits glued into the treads, I then built up the bits between them. I'm using erasers, cardstock, and yes, you guessed it, Gundam leftover bits from my Jeff robot 4 builds ago. In fact, I used up most of the remaining Gundam parts with this build, so I guess it's time to hop back on eBay for some more scraps. To help lock the treads in place, I added a bit of super glue to the inner edge, then added a teeny tiny bit of guitar string to the inside of the wheel area. And here's what that inside view looked like when it was done. The last part of the wheel assembly was the bit here, which I made from carved popsicle sticks and cardstock. One of the more significant lessons learned through the last few months of scratch building is the importance of properly attaching things. By contrast, this is an old scratch-built robot I did before starting this YouTube channel. While the result isn't awful, it's barely held together, and for that reason I can't stand it upright on its base anymore. To avoid a similar issue here, I drilled holes into Wally's sides and added bits of snipped paper clips, then drilled holes into his eraser shoulders. This will ensure a solid and hopefully durable finished model. The neck was pretty straightforward. I used a mechanical pencil for this bit here, added some other plastic bits, hole punched cardstock, yada yada, an eraser for this part here. Is this boring to anyone else, or have I just done this too many times? On to the eyes, and you know, if I owned woodworking tools, these eyes would have been so much easier to do, but instead I was stuck with wrestling with this foam core. After gluing several layers of the stuff together, I drew out the rough shape of Wally's eyes and got to cutting. With the basic shapes cut out, I then got to gently sanding, then glued a strip of poster paper to the edge with a bit of overlap. For the hardware behind Wally's eyes, I used a sawed-up pen casing and then added some little styrene covers. Tiny bits of a mechanical pencil insert were glued in, and then it was all glued together. Finally, some wires from an old USB cable were added, and then his eyebrows. And I am 100% positive that there are a dozen better ways of doing Wally's glass lenses, but none of them occurred to me, so I sliced up some googly eyes, spray painted the backs gray, painted the pupils black, added tiny ringlets from a cut up plastic tube I had lying around from something, and glued it all together. Before I could attach this to the head though, it was time to paint. I first coated all the paper parts in Mod Podge to seal them and then began painting. For most of the body parts, I primed with this mustard yellow, while the treads and hands got a base coat of black. Next, it was time for brushwork, starting with a bit of detailing on the treads and these things here. Then it was time to dry brush on some dark brown to knock off some of the lingering gloss finish and give it a sort of dusty look. Then burnt sienna for a touch of rust, and I repeated those steps for the body to turn this from a shiny brand new Wally to the 800-year-old rust bucket from the film. Oh, and before I forget, the winner of the hook diorama giveaway from the last video is Ramiro Silva. Not only did he bag the top comment from that video, but he was also dropping hook quotes like a madman on my Instagram, so enjoy your croc tower, Ramiro. It's on its way. With the base colors down, I then added this budget dark silver, which is just regular silver with black. And to get a worn metal look right along the edges, I applied some of this dark silver with a toothpick. then some finer rust speckles with a stiff brush that I totally ruined on purpose by forgetting it overnight in paint. The WALL-E logo was hand-drawn with the exception of the E, which was printed, hole-punched, and glued, though I did touch up the E a bit with some red paint to make it pop. For the base, I thought it'd be fitting to put WALL-E atop a mound of garbage, so I saved myself a bit of work by using this wooden frame purchased from the dollar store. Once it was all cleaned up, I sanded the edges for a slightly more rounded effect, then glued on a layer of foam core and sanded that down as well. For some texture, I glued down sand, gravel, rocks, and baking powder. Incidentally, the gravel and rocks are actually just kitty litter. Unused, of course. One thing I've learned after a few of these terrain bases is that it's important to mix it up when it comes to texture. Using different size grains of sand looks a lot better than just sticking to one type. And this watered down glue was then sprayed onto everything to help lock it down. Once dried, I intended to prime it with spray paint, but apparently this household hasn't sprayed anything brown since 1982, so I was left painting by hand. I then dry brushed on some other colors like this burnt sienna and khaki. Throughout the build process, I'd been collecting all my leftover bits of plastic, cardstock, and wire to build a trash heap, but at this stage this still wasn't enough, so I went scavenging through my drawers to uncover more junk. I then glued it all together piece by piece. The assembled trash heap was only held together by hot glue, so to make it less flimsy, I added a generous lathering of Mod Podge. I primed it with a coat of gray, but this ended up being a mistake, as it was a huge pain to get any kind of darker colors into the recesses of this thing later. And for further variation, I added touches of silver paint here and there. Then I added washes. Lots and lots of washes. And for this rust effect, I mixed burnt sienna craft paint with a pinch of sand and baking soda for that rough, gritty texture. It was then time to glue the trash heap onto the base, after which I added some other stray parts here and there, and I figured it was as good a time as any to paint the edges of the base black. And for a little added oomph to this WALL-E diorama, I decided I wanted him to be holding the iconic sprouting boot in one of his hands. In spite of my woefully wanting sculpting skills, polymer clay was really my only option here. I do think that my clay working skills have improved somewhat since the first pod racer build, but the same cannot be said of my filming skills. Anyhow, after baking, I airbrushed, added a wash and some color accents, and then I put everything together. You know, this might have been my funnest build yet. The junk pile was a pretty unique challenge, and trying to make WALL-E as film accurate as possible was a learning experience. For those of you who've subbed to this channel recently, welcome. And for those who keep coming back for one reason or another, I appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this is Gamey Builds, over and out.